Welcome to another homespun history lesson. This one's about the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe in the kind of late 80s, early 90s. And it's to do with the International GCSE history curriculum. So, first question is, who is that person who only died a few years ago? And the answer is Gorbachev. And the question is, how far was Gorbachev, the president of the USSR, the Union of Socialist Soviet Republic, something like that? How far was he personally responsible for the collapse of Soviet control over Eastern Europe? Well, he came to power in 1985 with a commitment to reform the USSR. One of his main policies was glasnost, or openness, which was an attempt to liberalise politics and society, including more media freedoms like criticism of the government. Another policy was perestroika, or restructuring, which was an attempt to improve the Soviet economy. So private ownership of industry and agriculture was encouraged, state control of the economy was reduced, foreign investment was allowed, and foreign trade was allowed. So what was Gorbachev's attitude to Eastern Europe, which Russia had control of? He was no longer prepared and felt he could no longer afford for the Russian army to police the east of Europe. He was happy for people to have a say in who ruled them, and economically the Union was crumbling. By the end of the 1980s, rationing was reintroduced, like after World War II they had rationing. So what was the role of the other Eastern European countries in the end of communism? Well, Poland's solidarity movements showed that a peaceful, united grassroots movement could succeed. Hungary's parliament adopted a democracy package, which included trade union rights, personal freedoms, less restricted press, more voting rights, and recognition of 1956 as a popular movement, not a foreign insurgency. In East Germany, mass emigration through newly opened borders raised the hope of change. Gorbachev urged the Communist Party to reform. An official accidentally declared an end to travel restrictions, which led to crowds gathering and tearing down the Berlin Wall. Now, Vladimir Putin was working for the Russian Soviet Secret Service in Eastern Europe at the time, and he rang Moscow, said, you've got to bring the tanks in because everyone's getting rid of communism. And they just ignored him. They didn't do anything. And communism fell, Germany was reunited. In Romania, the dictator Ceausescu ordered the military to fire on protesters, but they refused and he was forced to flee. Democratic elections were held in 1990. So who's this? There's a massive clue in the fact that there's a big American flag in the background, so he looks rather presidential with his rather dapper suit and beaming smile. I think he's got turkey teeth for a pearly white smile. It's Ronald Reagan, and he was the President of the United States of America. So when we're considering other external factors to the breakdown of the Iron Curtain, there was the war in Afghanistan, which from 1979 to the late 1980s drained Soviet military resources. Then the United States were encouraging Soviet disarmament and freedom of movement. And President Reagan increased military spending in America by a third, which the USSR couldn't compete with. So they were forced to resort to diplomacy. So back to our original question, how far was Gorbachev personally responsible for the collapse of Soviet control over Eastern Europe? Well, that's for you to answer, but there was obviously other factors, even though he was pretty important.